Hi, my lovelies. Good morning. I know it's good morning again. That's because it's late morning. Very early more so. It's like I think 3 o'clock or thereabout. I just find it easier, less noise, and just more calm to record early hours of the morning. And besides, I'm a nocturnal being, but I hope you guys are doing good. I hope you guys are well. I'm fine as well. I'm good. Thank you for asking. You guys. You guys, what's happened to me in the past 2 weeks? The literal worst. And do you know what that is? I know I feel like I'm sounding so dramatic even saying this, but it really is the worst for me. You guys, I've read I realized that I've read all the books in my TBR. Disclaimer, TBR is should I say, a book talk or Instagram, book people lingo, right? And just basically means to be read, books that you keep or you save for later. Exactly. I realized I've read every book in my TBR. I do not have any unread books. I finished reading a book and I placed it back on my shelf or library or whatever it could be. It can be termed. And I just realized that there's nothing left to read. You guys, I've been miserable for like a week because I have a stockpile with my vendor and I was hoping that I was going to wait a little while just to add more books to it. So I don't know if I should call it a fetish, but it's just I just love it when I buy my books in bulk because books are quite expensive and the easiest way to get them is to see you stockpile and you get them at once. And even then I still like it when I have a large amount of books. It just gives me joy in a very, very odd and happiness in a very, very odd way. And that was what I was waiting for. And I assumed that, I still had books that I could read in the meantime, pending till the moment I asked for delivery for the ones I had stockpile. You guys, I've not actually gone encountered this in a very long time that I'm left with no books to read. Like I've read all of the books and I had to resort to some ebooks, and for some reason I'm finding it difficult. I'm having my attention span. I've been having issues with it of late. My attention span has been really really short, and it's been bothering me a lot. So it's even worse when I try to read ebooks because I just keep going on and off and I'm not able to concentrate so much. But man, it's so you guys, that's what it is. But anyways, I'm not forgetting. We are continuing where we stopped last episode, where I spoke about not wanting to use filler words. So I'm going to try to continue with that today and be as oh my goodness, I just used another but to be as clearly articulative as possible. Yes. Yeah, I read a book though. The last one that I read before I realized I'd run out of books. Martina Cole. She's a British crime writer. Oh my goodness. It wasn't such a disappointment so much. The family. I read a lot of yeah, I can almost say a lot, over 5 or 6 of her books. And they are quite good, not so bad, but they are just the meh, just there for me. I find that books really repetitive. I find that she just keeps going on and on. It's like we are saying the same thing, and they are always quite bulky. And assuming for me, I prefer it when the book is rather averaged paced, or it isn't so bulky, but it gives good writing, good story writing, and it just doesn't take me over and over the same story rather than it being bulky, voluminous, and you're just going over and over. You're saying the same thing like it's a repeated cycle. I was so frustrated, but like you guys know that me, I will see it to the end. It's a very, very weird thing I have with books like that. I don't know how to drop it, or even if I drop it, if it takes me a million years, I'm still going to finish that book because I will read it with anger that I'm angry to see this till the end. I want to say that's how I feel each time I read most of her books. They just are repetitive and it's just basic, you know, London crimes and whatnot. It's not much of, it's not good enough for me to want to talk about it, but you guys, there's no episode without book updates. So yeah, mm, drum rolls. Over to the book. So why we are here, what brought us here? Last episode, I talked about one book that you know. I didn't unveil the what, like I didn't talk about that. I didn't mention what book it was. I wanted to leave you guys in suspense, but I feel like I'm falling short of that. I'm just terrible at it. But anyways, we've yapped enough, or rather I have. So let's just go straight into it. Today we're talking about, we're talking about, we're oh my goodness. We're talking about To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. It's a classic. And for one, ordinarily, personally, I've always had issues. Not issues, but I just find it a different shift whenever I read classics, especially English classic. Should I call British rather? British classics. They are much more complicated. The English is more advanced, and it just gives me a headache oftentimes. But I find that American classics are, should I say, not less complicated. They just is easy. The flow is easier. Reading a Police To Kill a Mockingbird is a prime example. There's so much I could say about the book. I don't have much to talk about for today, or rather, they are actually quite concise, the themes and whatnot. But it's such a beautiful book, and I can see how it has transcended time. I used to hear about it a lot. I've heard about it a lot. To Kill a Mockingbird, To Kill a Mockingbird, it just passes me. And the day I saw it on my vendors, while she posted it, and I was like, you know what, it's high time I read this book. I've heard about it a lot, and I just want to know what it is about. I assumed it was one complicated, and or something I will probably just drop halfway, or was going to bore me or thereabout. But I was surprised, and positively so. I really loved it, most especially the humor in the book. And I think one thing that made me know that I was going to enjoy the book was the foreword to the book. You know what? Let me read it out for you guys. So this was rather okay, let's say was this was Apali. This was a foreword for the book. It reads rather, please spare Mockingbird an introduction. As a reader, I loathe introductions to novels. I associate introductions with long-gone authors and works that are being brought back into print after decades of interment. Although Mockingbird will be 33 this year, it has been out of print, and I am still it has never been out of print, and I am still alive, although very quiet. Introductions inhibit pleasure, they kill the joy of anticipation, they frustrate curiosity. The only good thing about introductions is that in some cases they delay the dose to come. Mockingbird still says what it has to say. It has managed to survive the years without preamble. And I think this was another edition, and this was the foreword for the book rather than an introduction. And this was written in 12 February 1993. I think this was the first thing that just gave me hint, that just made me look like, you know what, you made a good choice picking this book. And from what she said, yes, it does come off as, I don't know how to place it, but you can see the style of, you can see from the tone of that forward, you can see it being shown throughout the book. I think it's quite rare, it's not common for you to have humor or satire in classics, at least for many classics that I've read, and that's not so much. But I do have a pretty good idea about classics, and it's not so much. There aren't really much. They haven't seen much or had much idea of classics that have such good humor and satire, especially when the theme of the book is something as heavy. The themes that are treated in the book are quite heavy. So for it to be humorous and satirical, it just shows how brilliant and intelligent the author is. I know I'm going way ahead of myself here, but we're going like we always do. We're taking one after the other. So yes, let's talk about the author. Our author is Harper Lee. Harper Lee. She was born in Monroeville, Alabama, and you can see. I think the even that set. I think where the location of her birth set the stage. Let me use the word. Let me use that descriptions for the book. It was a small town in south. It was a small southern town that shaped everything. So I think at the where she was birthed or her location or her origin, I said location. Rather, it set the you set the stage for the whole book. And and like I mentioned earlier, from the forward of the book, you can almost see the kind of person she is, or it gives you an inkling into a persona in a way. And I think it's not very often that I will read the book and I'll wish in my heart that, oh, I would have loved, or it would be such a delight to meet this author. Apali is one of the very few authors, not because of anything. They are good. There are a lot of authors and really brilliant authors that their books really are dear to me and that I love them. But it's not very common that I would nurse a wish in my heart in a way that I'll be like, oh, it would be such a nice thing, or it would be such a privilege to meet with this author that write these books or wrote this particular book. But Apali is one of those authors. Although she's dead now, she died in 2016 at the age of 82. She lived quite long. She's one of those authors that I wish, though I would have wished I met her, even if it's not in a personal, tit to tit, personal level conversation, but just casually. Too, I would have loved to hear her talk and just have an insight to the kind of person she is. And throughout the whole book, you can see the way our life bleeds. Our life bleeds into the book. Our main author, our main characters are people in our lives. Like Atticus Finch is like a father. Or should I say, got inspiration for Atticus Finch from a father, and Scott Finch to Scout rather. Finch to yes to she rather Scout Finch too, she is should I say her inspiration was Apali herself. Then Deal is her best friend in real life. And overall, Tom Robinson, who is, should I say, is he the protagonist or antagonist? I think he's the protagonist. I keep mixing these up sometimes. I just mix them up. He is not, he doesn't represent a particular person in her life, but more like the racial injustice that she had experienced, especially in the southern, in a small southern town, as at that time, as at that season, and at that age. This was written in the year 1960, or it was published rather in the year 1960. So, To Kill a Mockingbird, from what I've seen about it, it gives a feel of autobiography. In fact, when you're reading it, if they didn't tell you that, oh, this is not an autobiography or a memoir, it gives that feel. And in a way, for me, I get that feel. And when you look at how most of our lives and most of the characters in the books were people that mirror our life, you can almost say it was, but mainly it's an emotional truth or just truth itself that was weaved into fiction. I think that's mostly the essence of autobiography if you think about it. But for this book, it gives the feel of an autobiography, and one could even say it was. I feel like I'm repeating myself with that, but you get my point. So it's not exactly an autobiography, it's more of a fiction, but it just weaves the truth into fiction. And it's just like what I normally say, or my belief about books, that no matter how whatever the genre of the book, even horror books self, no matter the books, no matter whatever genre or whatever form or shape the book takes, a percent, no matter, it could be a large percent, it could be minute, it could be something small, but there is a percent of that, a particular percentage of that books that is drawn or that is inspired by true life events, probably something that happened in the past or something that is presently happening. So yes, that's just Harper Lee. Is she funny how she really never did a lot of works. I think she did some short essays and some short things, but her major book or her major success is the To Kill a Mockingbird. And for 50 years after she published, she didn't publish any other thing. She was quiet, nobody heard from her. And you can hear from that forward where she mentioned that yes, it's not changed, and she just that, and she is not dead yet. Humorous, right? That she is just being quiet, and that's actually how she is. No one really heard from her, no one heard anything. There wasn't any news from her. There was, I think, from what I read, there were a lot of speculations, but no one can deny the brilliance that is the book. And I read that sometime in 2015 that she released a sequel to this book. Go a watch man, I've forgotten the title. And there were speculations too that she didn't publish it. It was a manuscript. I think some people, but maybe are kids or those close to her, they published it. And there were theories that she probably wouldn't have been happy about it, or it wasn't, they did it without her full cooperation, considering her health issues and whatnot. Because I think she died the year after. She died in year 2016, and the book was published in year 2015. I haven't found it. If I find it, I'm looking forward to reading, because I would love to see what the continuation of the story is. So that's just, I don't think that's little, but that's just it with our author. She's a very interesting person. Albeit there isn't really much to know about her, but she's quite interesting. She's kind of author that I just like her. I've not met her, I don't know much about her, but for some reason she gives me a feel of Maya Angelou. I don't know why. They are two different people, two different races, but for some reason I cannot just help but have a feeling. When I remember, I'm reminded of Maya Angelou. I think it's the style of writing and the fact that even Maya Angelou's, although it's her memoirs that I've not read any of her poems. They are also set in southern towns and just how life was at that time. So I think that's one of the reasons why. Oh my goodness. So okay, now we summary. I promise I will be doing summaries and not just jumping into our themes. So what's the summary of our book, or what's the book about? What's To Kill a Mockingbird about? What does it entail? To Kill a Mockingbird is basically follows the story of Scout Finch. Jean, I think her real name, according to the book, Scout was like a nickname, Jean Louise Finch. Yeah, I guess I can't really remember. I've read it for almost 3 or 3.5 weeks, but it just sat with me and I knew I needed to talk about it. Although she is the narrator in this story, she narrated the story for us. So our book follows her life and that of her brother, Jeremy Finch. There's a middle name there, I can't remember. So it follows their life and they are growing up in a small southern town named Maycomb, yeah, May and Combe. So yeah, Maycomb during the 1930s. So we see they take us about 40%, or at the beginning of the book, we see the day-to-day activities, they are growing up, their mundane days. I think that's what really gives it the lore of what it gives of an autobiography feel, because that's just mainly most memoirs or autobiography. That is how it starts. You see the main mundane childhood, growing up, and all of that. And what makes this even more beautiful, and what makes it differ, or what differentiates it from other books that maybe a memoir kind of book, is the humor. It has such humor. It's not dark, it's not comedy, it's not funny, it's just satire and humor. I'm one person, I've never been a fan of comedy as a genre, be it a movie, in books. I'm not sure there are comedic books, but I've never been a fan of comedy. I just, for some reason, it just has never worked for me. I really would. It's not my thing. If for some reason or the other I desire maybe a comic relief or something, I'd rather watch stand-up comedy. And even then, there are set of comedians that I know that no matter what, these are the only set of people that their comedy makes sense to me. It's not rubbish. It's even with them trying to be humorous, there's still something to learn from the things they say. Dave Chappelle is one of those. So I've never been a fan of comedy in movies. It's one of the reasons why I do not like rom-com too for movies. And if for any reason or the other, I believe that if for any reason or the other, comedy should be introduced into a genre, it has to be satire or dark humor. And not everyone, not every, in fact, it takes a lot of, I believe, intelligence or intellectual for you to pull off for you to pull off humor, dark humor, satire. It takes a lot. It's not a genre. It's not a type of, should I say, something a lot of people or actors or actresses or authors are able to achieve. But Apali on point. That was even what got me, that helped me got rooted in the book. It was the humor, the satire in the book, and how a child at that age, I think she was around, the book started when she was around 7 to 8 years, and for her to have that amount of humor, yeah, obviously it's fiction and she's not the one, but for her to have that kind of humor, it just made the book really worthwhile. So yes, like I was saying, we continuing in our summary. So we see a journey, their childhood journey, them growing up, our brother Jem and their friend Dale, how they played, they were exploring, and they were curious about their neighbor, their mysterious neighbor, Boo Radley. Boo Radley, yes, because Boo Radley never leaves the house. We didn't really explore that mystery or know much about Bradley until the end. It was mysterious a majority of the book. And then from then on there was a shift in the book where we see how their childhood was interrupted when their father Atticus is a well-respected lawyer, a kind and a good man. He's the kind of person you would want your father to be. And apparently he mirrored, or she got inspiration from our own biological father. And well, while reading the book, Atticus just seemed like the kind of person that, yes, this has to be like you would wish or want your father to be, considering the fact that his wife had died. That's Scott and James' mother. She died while giving birth. No, not while giving birth. At when Scout was at a very young age. So he's just the kind of man. He's the kind of character, an 100% character, but still it wasn't too loud. It wasn't too subtle either. But you could see all the great characteristics that one would expect in a character. Let's go on. So yes, Atticus Finch is a well-respected lawyer and all of those. And so their childhood was interrupted when he defended a black man that was falsely accused of assaulting a white woman. So as the trial, because Atticus was the one defending Tom Robinson, who is the black man, and as the trial continues, it unfolds, and they're trying to defend Tom Robinson. Rather, as we are seeing Atticus trying to defend Tom Robinson, we see how Scott begins to see prejudice, injustice, cruelty behind, the towns. It's a small town. The town that seemed peaceful, and it seemed like everyone was loving, everyone got along. So from then on, when the trial began to unfold and they were trying to Atticus was trying to work towards getting him acquainted. Scott began rather to see how the town that seemed to, should I say, the small town that seemed to be like a heaven, how she began to see the hidden things that were beneath the towns. And so we see that despite Atticus proving Tom's innocence while in the book, the jury still convicts him just on the basis of his race, of his skin color. Atticus was able to prove beyond reasonable doubt with evidence that Tom Robinson was not guilty and was innocent of the crime. But still, yes, he was convicted. And the outcome of that sentence exposed, or rather opened their eyes. It opened the children's eyes, that's Gem and Scout, to the unfairness of the world, and not just of the world but of the adult world in general. So towards the end, at the end of the book, we see the children how they discover that Bradley, that they always saw as a mysterious person and somewhat even bad person, or feared. They didn't particularly see him as a bad person, but they feared him. This was someone that doesn't leave the house, and he was mysterious. And that's the thing about mystery. Mystery breeds fear in a way. That's just what it is. It breeds fear. And so they saw that this person that they feared the most was just has been quietly watching them, maybe rooting for them and looking over them in the way. And at the end, he saves both Jem and Scout from harm. And Scout finally was able to understand in a childlike, and she had already begun to grow up small, small, she had entering teenagehood, and she finally understood that people are not always what the same. And sometimes courage is not exactly loud, it's not exactly bold, sometimes it's quiet and it's subtle, but it's courage nonetheless. I really am trying. I do not want today's episode because, to be fair, it's not a voluminous book, but it does pack a punch, and the themes are quite heavy. It's not a sad. I wouldn't say it's a sad book per se. More like is history being retold, and history is never really, I don't think that history has ever really been a fun, or has ever really given a sweet ending. If anything it gives a bittersweet, to be very honest. And the book, I've been drawn, not lately but naturally, I'm always drawn to books that they explore the life of the blacks in the early 90s and 80s, when the slavery, black slavery and whatnot. I think that was why I said that, or I had the feel that I could almost, for some reason, while reading this book, I was just reminded of Maya Angelou, because I read her first memoir, the first in her memoir series. Now I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and it just feels similar. And we just see, and that too was staged in a southern town, a small southern town. And I cannot help but bleed, my heart cannot help but go out. I mean, it's been a long time, and my heart cannot just help but go out to imagine that this was what they faced, or what they were going through in those times. I cannot help but imagine. These are people that were rooted from their they didn't decide that, oh, one day we want to go to America. No, that was not it. They were in their houses, they were in their huts, they were in their villages, and people with different race and different skin just came and decided that, oh, they are inferior for no other reason rather than the color of the skin, and probably the fact that they had gone ahead in a bit in civilization. And to be fair, that's just partially true, because when we look back in history and we look back at time, we see that there were actually civilizations as at those times. A lot of African countries, I think, were just really quite gullible, and a lot of African countries, or they sold themselves. And for what, when you watch movies that retell these stories, I remember while I was younger, I watched this particular movie on African Magic then, where the king of the village, he had missionaries come over, and what did they give him in exchange for people that he gave? His own people, his own villagers that he was supposed to look after. Mirror. They gave him a mirror. They had never seen a mirror before, and they were able to see their reflection. And for that reason, and let's say one jewelry, one bracelet, he gave the queen one bracelet, and he gave the king a mirror. I would just inconsequential things that seemed, and they sold a lot of the villagers, and that just goes to show it's quite fictional, but when you read some historical books, text or whatnot, you realize that it wasn't so far from reality. Just my heart just breaks that was what they went through. And sometimes some of these things are still present, according to what Harper Lee wrote in her foreword. Although compared to that time and this time, it's still a bit of distance from each other. That's like 30 something years ago. 1993 to 2025. That's 30, over 30 something years, just a little over 30 years. But some of these things are still, that's what even hurts the most. Some of these things, there are still things that still occurs. This racial injustice, maybe not as loud and not as big and bold, but they are still subtle, they are still there. But so let's not waste our time. Let's just go into the. In fact, we've already started treating the theme. One of the first themes, although that wasn't the first thing that came across, but it's, I think it's the major theme. That wasn't the first one that faced you, or rather, at the beginning, it was subtle at the beginning. The racial injustice. It wasn't until we got to the middle and towards the end of the book that it became very evident, and it became very obvious. That's racial injustice. That was the first, is the major theme of the book, to be very honest. Although it wasn't so prominent at the beginning, not until the middle of the book. We see Tom Robinson, who was just being a kind man. And to be fair, if a white woman asked you to come and do something at that time, even if their family were the scrum of the town, they still are white, your color still differs, and they are superior to you and you are inferior. And this is a man that was just being good and no, just kind and whatnot, and being falsely accused of rape just because a white woman found him desirable in a way, and her father caught him, and they decided that, oh, why not? How dare? How dare? God, it was so ridiculous. The reason for him being falsely accused was just so ridiculous, and I just could not wrap my head around it. And I realized that that was actually the life a lot of black people lived at that time. A lot of black slaves, not just even slaves, even the ones that had freedom. That was their life. The way they were spoken about, they were called nigger. Ah, it breaks my heart. It really does, considering the fact that I'm a black person too. So we see how Tom Robinson tries his trial exposes the deep racism embedded in Maycomb. Maycomb that seemed like this sweet little southern town where everyone knows each other, everyone is knitted, closely knitted together, and we see that there is something rotten beneath the surface, that racial injustice and that racial a place where truth is not enough to overcome prejudice, even when the truth was visible, when the truth was very glaring like this, where they were reasonable, beyond reasonable doubt, that this guy is not guilty of this crime that you have falsely accused him of, rather, and still yet, they still convicted him and he was killed. Was he hanged? But he died at the end of it. And the injustice, and the fact that the injustice is not subtle. Although Tom Robinson was the main character, like he was the one with the one who wasn't subtle, but we see other subtle characters like Caprona, their house, should I say housemaid? Yes, them Scout and Gem, them the Finches, their housemaid. You can see the subtle difference, the subtle racial injustice. So we see racial injustice both on the subtle level and on the not so subtle level, but we are majorly focusing on Tom Robinson. We see how it's loud, it's painful, and it's especially unfair. And when you now look at it from the lens of a child who believes or sees the world as good, there are some people that are quite a bit out of context. There are some people that believe that anything a child says, or whenever if a child says something, that there is a large amount of truth to them. As adults, as we've grown older, we've grown matured, we know what is what and what is not. So we've cultivated the habit of trying to sometimes even lying just for the sake of the better good, just trying to not be too, if you're a good person. There are some people who are bound, they'll tell you they are brutally honest, they cannot help people. Majorly, as adults, as grown-up people, we've learned the skill of not always saying all that we see, all that we hear, all that we see, being reserved in some things, unlike kids who say it as it is, the way they see it. If a kid sees you and say, oh, you're beautiful, genuinely, from they are actually being honest, they genuinely see you as beautiful. Sometimes kids will say something, or children, they'll say something and it will come off as hurtful, but they do not have the emotional intelligence to know that, oh, this should not be said, you should not, or even if it is said, not in this particular way or manner. They are just kids and say it the way they see it or the way as it is. So imagine a child looking at all of that, that enraged, that injustice, that painful unfair world, where she had seen the life or where she had seen the world in such great beautiful lenses, is even hurtful. When you are reading that book, I think that's another thing that makes it even great, and I think is one of the reasons that has helped it to transcend time, is that you see all of this from the lens of a child. You know, sometimes when you see all these racial injustice things, when you see some books, it is from the as mm, from the point of view of an adult or someone who knows right and wrong. But this is a story, this is an unfair injustice, this is, should I say, their debut into the world and into society in such unfair manner. And that just gives it a, should I say, a tinging and beautiful feel to it in a very odd manner. I hope that makes sense. Then made the first thing that I saw before we entered racial injustice, I just felt like talking about racial injustice, is innocence and childhood. I think while I was reading at the beginning, this reminded me again of all those African stories that I read while I was younger. It was common, all these books that were told by Nigerian or African authors. For some reason, I can't remember some of these authors, but people like them Adichie, Sem Soyinka, although Soyinka uses complex had English in his works, but Adichie just is just plain, is like reading, is a great storytelling. The storytelling in this book was impeccable. When I started reading from the beginning, where we see Scout taking us through our daily life, it's just mundane. There is nothing big, nothing spectacular, playing around, playing in the sand, those mundane things that you do while you're growing up. And it just shows you that yes, we might be oceans and worlds apart, but this is almost similar everywhere for a normal average childhood, though childhood that is not marred with, violence and whatnot. How a typical childhood looks like, you just realize how similar we are in so many ways. Although as at that time, the whites, they didn't see that, but when I read books like this, I'm just reminded of my childhood, yeah, oceans away in Africa, in Nigeria, yeah, and stories too that that were written, that we read, that were rooted in African, in Nigerian culture. And the similarities are so glaring that if they didn't tell you that, oh, this wasn't written by a Nigerian, I'd be like, really, are you sure? It just feels so similar. That was what I got. That was the first thing as I started reading the book. Childhood, the innocence of childhood, the curiosity of a child's mind, the childlikeness, the innocence and the freedom that childhood grants you. Of recent, I wrote an article, I wrote a post on Substack where I talked about how I miss the innocence of childhood, the freedom, the unboundedness that childhood grants you. No one expects much from you. You see life as it is. You are, sometimes you even be blunt with it, and adults can't even chastise you. At the very most, they'll just say, oh no, don't do that, don't, be very careful of saying things like that. But there is no burden. You think about the most mundane, inconsequential things, and even when you think of the hard things, they are not as heavy as they would be in your heart. They don't weigh heavy as they would have weighed if you were an adult. And the beautiful thing about Scott and James Childish is their father, Atticus. Although she was a tomboy, because basically she was raised by her father and her mother wasn't there. But the emotional intelligence of a child of that age was just impeccable. How she was able to read and write at a very early stage, where her mate sef, at some point in school, her teacher had to ask her to tell her dad and tell her as well that she should stop reading, that it's not good for a child that age. That was how advanced it goes to show, because according to the book, we are reading this book from her lens and she is the one narrating it for us. So is actually expected with the way she narrates it and how we see her, that she's that intelligent. And you know the funny thing, the thing not mind blowing per se, but I just found it really quirky is not, it's just surprisingly beautiful, is how they call their father Atticus. That's what they refer to, be Gem and Scout. And a lot of people were having issues, even Atticus sisters and his family members are, how would you call your father Atticus by name, not your typical dad or daddy or papa or whatever. They call their father Atticus. And I think also the fact that I gave birth to them at an older age, I think that played a part in a way, because he treated them, he didn't bring them up like children or treated them like children. He treated them the way you would treat an adult, a reasonable sensing adult. And it was evident, and I think that upbringing that they had also shaping why they were so against and to racial injustice. There was so much impact of those racial injustices, especially when the trial became finally over. And though Tom Robinson was proven with evidence to be innocent, was still convicted, while the impact of that trial had so much, hey Jesus, why there was so much hard impact of that trial on them. Because if you looked at their age, it should just be like an experience on their childhood or something that happened while they were children, but not so much so that it shapes them in such manner, at least the way the book explained or described it to us. It goes to show how intelligent their childhood was, because they had an intelligent father who didn't just treat them, he treated them as children when he should, but at the same time brought them up as intelligent children that grew up in that, or that we hope that started growing up into intelligent adults, teenagers, if that makes sense. And we see another thing that we see is how, especially Scout, how and Jem, how they slowly lose that innocence, how the reality of the injustice in the world, the unfairness, the painful and the hard truth, how we slowly robbed them of that innocence of childhood. Sometimes it hurts when you see, I know it's fiction and it's a book, but when you see yourself, or when you see a child losing innocence, it's beautiful when they slowly metamorphosize into adulthood, little by little themselves. But when you see that innocence and that childlikeness just ripped off as a result of experiences or things like this, it just puts you in such a somber mood that this is fiction. And in a way not so fiction, to be honest, because this is Harper Lee in our own beautiful fictional way describing our childhood for us. So how much more other children that grew up and lost their innocence like this. And this is even for the white children, if we were to compare with black children, that they were on the receiving end of that injustice and that unfairness. If the white children that had good parents that were not deeply rooted in racism and injustice and whatnot are feeling this way, feel this impact of that injustice, how much more, it takes us back to racial injustice, how much more black children that their parents and eventually they themselves were, you know were the victims of this injustice and this unfair, unjust, painful world. It just goes to show you, it just breaks your heart, to be honest. At least it breaks mine, that I can't count how many people do you want to count went through all of this. And it's really heartbreaking. Then another thing that that I saw is moral courage, and that came from Atticus Finch. Atticus was described as a character who, he wasn't a loud character. He's this kind of character that just on his own good. He's a kind person. Everyone knows him to be a good person. He's not loud. He doesn't have wahala. He goes on his way. He's right. He does right by everyone. He's not the kind of person that he's not intimidating. But we see his courage, his quiet courage, even when the whole town turned on him for having defending, because Why should if they tell you a black man raped a white girl, then he did, whether he did it or not. How dare you justify or try to justify that a black man is innocent? Is a black man can never be innocent. Whatever it might be, they are always guilty. So we see how we stood strong in the face of that should I call it temptation? Yes, that temptation, that struggle where the whole town turned on him, his family members turned on him. Even they turned on him so much so that they bullied his kids that he is a nigger lover, just because he stood on his morals. That it's not fair. And somewhere in the book where we're reading that where it was like there is no one to do it, even if he hurts him, that if he doesn't do it, then he will not be himself. And that's what morals are. There are times where it really hurts and is painful. You are being ostracized when you stand, you're standing on your morals and the things you believe in. But you not standing on them just makes you feel like you're dead. That was what I was saying in this case with Atticus. And I realized, or we can see from the way the book proceeds, that in a way it gives him strength, even though he tried to act strong for his kids, and he didn't want them to see that all of those all of that negativity was getting to him. Because no matter how strong you are as a person, it will get to you. It's like just they ostracized him, the family ostracized him, the town ostracized him. So you could see how it got strength from that quiet. His strength wasn't loud, his courage wasn't shouty, it was quiet strength, quiet courage and quiet strength. And in a way, I feel like I lean towards courage, those kind of courage that comes in such quiet forms, that you do not, you are just standing on ground, you're standing on business, you are not loud about it. Just little by little you draw strength from the quiet. You don't have to be, yes, sometimes courage could be loud, you have to be loud about it, you have to announce, you have to proclaim it. But you see, when you're courageous in such quiet manner, in a manner that doesn't entirely shout, a type of courage that whether you win or not, you're fighting either ways. That's just beautiful, because that was what we saw with Atticus. He knew it. I feel he knew it, although it was not expressly stated, but there were inferration. It was inferred that he knew what the outcome of the conviction of the law would eventually turn out to. But he seek fought in spite of it, and that's just beautiful courage there. Whether you're winning, whether you're not going to win, whether you're sure, whether you're not sure, you're fighting notwithstanding. Atticus gave us that, and I drew strength from that. In a way, I drew strength and I learned from it that you're winning or you're not, as far as you're standing strong on the things that you truly truly believe in, and whether you win it, and if you eventually end up not winning it, you are able to live with yourself that yes, I did try my best, I did what I knew was right. Yes, I tried, it didn't work out the way I expected or I would have wanted, but I knew I did work hard at it. I did what I'm supposed to do. That way you're able to sleep better at night. You're able to live with yourself. You are not laden or burdened with guilt. And we see empathy and understanding. And this is an ill I will always, I think I've mentioned it over and over on a lot of our episodes here, is that you, as a human being, empathy is not something you should lack. Not this time around, it's not even sympathy where you pity people, but just being empathetic. You can be stoic, you can be disciplined, you can even be strict, but at the same time be empathetic and be kind. Because no one would have defended Tom Robinson. No one would. But we could see empathy running from Atticus and the judge too. I've forgotten his name. I don't know why I didn't think to try and check his name. While I'm just talking about, I just remember that the judge too was an empathetic judge, because he made sure that it was Atticus that was defending him, because he knew there was no one else up to that standard. No one else would defend Tom like Atticus would. because it was known his nature. Everyone knew his nature, the kind of person he is. Empathy is a necessary skill, and I believe you can learn it too if you believe in yourself that, oh, I'm not as empathetic as I think I should be. Is a skill that you could learn, Yes, and there is also the very subtle thing, the coexistence of good and evil. Is one thing that I'm coming to the realization, not realizing per se, but I'm beginning to see that good and bad, as much as it feels odd or weird to even say it, that they do coexist. They can coexist in a particular city, state, in a town, and at the same time in a person. You see a person and you be like, wow, this person used to be this person does this, and then you realize that, oh, there's still some things that, wow, I thought you were this good. How come you still have this aspect to you? So another thing that I came to understand, or another thing that was explored, is how both good and bad, how they good and evil, good and bad, how they coexist, and they can, not just can, but they actually do coexist. They can coexist in a particular city, a particular location, and most definitely in a person, in one particular person. And that sometimes it's not all good and all bad. Sometimes there are the gray areas too. That was another thing that was subtly, it was very, very subtle. We see it in characters like Buradley, Mrs. Dubois, and even the townspeople in general, how good and evil, how they coexist. And you be like, wow. And it helps you to relate it to normal life, to be very, very honest. And the last thing that we're exploring in this book is justice versus law. And I've been a lover of thriller books and a lover of crime shows. I've watched a lot of crime shows in my life, a lot. And I've come to realize that most times, sometimes, okay, let me not exaggerate and say most times, sometimes justice does not equal law, and law does not equal justice. Sometimes the system is just, should I say, it's not even like it's rigged, but it just doesn't always melt out justice that it should. It doesn't. It's one of the reasons why you watch some movies and we are we are rooting for the villain that melts out justice. Is he doing it the proper way? No. But still, we are happy for the fact that the justice that the law isn't serving a villain, a wicked, a monstrous being, is melting it out. So you find yourself rooting for these morally great characters. We read them sometimes in books, watching them in movies. You find yourself rooting for these morally great characters, because they are melting out justice that you believe the law should have melted out or should have given out. And that's one thing that I learned again, or a reminder this book reminded me of, that sometimes, maybe not often times, let me not exaggerate and say often times, but that sometimes the law does not equal justice and justice does not equal law. And that's just the unfairness of the world. Sometimes nothing you can do about it. Like Tom Robinson, his wife became a widow, his children orphans. There is no one they could go to. In fact, if they even got trial, and there was an instance where they almost killed. They had gone to the prison where they kept him to kill him, and it was the arrival of German scouts that stopped these mobs from killing him. So that even got a trial alone is such a big opportunity, something that was just is rare, not talk of him getting justice that he deserved. And so what would, in that case, what does Tom's wife or his children want to? There's nothing they can do other than just to accept fate, and that just shows the unfair and unjustness that comes with, should I call it living or being? Life is just unfair, sometimes it's unjust, and the reality can be very daunting, or it's a rude awakening. Yes, it's a rude awakening. And at most you can only wish, you can pray, and you can hope that you are not on the other side of the fence, because I don't even know what to say to it after that, but it just wakes you up in a way that in the split of a second, all can be going well and you're just on the wrong side, and you're on the wrong side of faith. And then you cannot even trust the system to give you justice. Man, overall, it's a beautiful. I would recommend it 10 over 10, 100 over 10 for a classic. For a classic, it was easy to read. It was not hard. It was not complicated because for classics, be it Russian or British or even Japanese classics, there's always a feel of complications to understanding and getting what the author is trying to say or the picture author is trying to picture. But for this, it was straight to the point. You would think it's a book that was written of recent, not so far as over 60 years now, 1960 to 2025. That's over 60, almost 70 something years or thereabout. So you wouldn't think it was pretty easy and pretty well understandable, and the humor and satire, love it. I love it. It just made it better. It made it better. I think it gave us an inkling into the kind of person Harper Lee really is as a, realistically speaking in real life, how who she is, or maybe the way her mind works in a way, sha. But anyways, I loved it. It's a good read. I would recommend it, and I can see why it has transcended time and nations and whatnot. But guys, I think we're able to keep it under an hour today, or an hour. Exactly an hour. So thank you guys. I think this is our 13th or 12th episode. I'm so proud of myself and of you guys for working with me. Anyways, we'll be drawing the curtains for today. Hopefully I would have gotten my books, and I have something for I have something for you guys. Alright. Thank you. Bye.